Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video, we're going to be going over my top 8 most fun builds on patch 1.13, and the coolest thing about this video is we're going to be covering a lot of weapons that I haven't covered before, including this one, Devonia's Hammer, and later in the video, we're also going to do the Sword of Night 2, which a lot of people have been waiting for. So if you've used Ordovis's Greatsword before, then you probably already know what this Ash of War does. Devonia's Vortex is the same exact type thing, and it does do less damage overall than the Greatsword itself. However, there are a few advantages this weapon has over Ordovis's Greatsword. And the advantage for this weapon is its jump attacks and its charge attacks. There's so much posture damage that you can get out of this weapon because it's a colossal hammer, so it's going to do a lot of poise damage, and it does that job quite well. So, unlike the other weapon where you're talking about Ordovis's Greatsword, which has a similar Ash of War, the Vortex here does a little bit less damage, but you're going to get more poise damage from the weapon as a whole. That's the big advantages of what I'm getting to here, and I really like that about this weapon. As far as the regular hits, it does solid damage too. As a Colossal Hammer, this is quite good, and in DLC, there's a lot of bosses that take not only good physical damage, but they take good holy damage as well. So the fact that this is a high-powered physical weapon with a little bit of holy damage is excellent for DLC. And let's see how much we do right here with the Vortex, and we're going to get 9,000 damage. Keep in mind, dragons take extra damage to the head. We are able to get an extra hit in there as well. But overall, the benefit here is you're going to get good poise damage. You have a pretty good Ash of War and decently high AR as well. Solid strength faith weapon. Let's jump into equipment. And we have Devonia's Hammer plus 10. Not sure how to pronounce that. We have Erdtree Seal. And we're using part of the Grey Burst set and Rakshasa's Armor, Claw Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Godfrey Icon. This is chargeable, by the way. Then we have the Holy Tier and Faith Tier as well. We're going to jump into stats now for this awesome Strength and Faith build. It's going to have some good stats, too. We have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 30 Endurance. We have 50 Strength. That's going to be 75 when we two-hand this, 15 Dexterity. We have 45 Faith with a Faith Tier. For our buffs, we're going to be using Golden Vow and Howler Shabriri. If you don't want the extra damage from Howler Shabriri, you could use Flame Grant Me Strength to get 20% more physical damage. Howl's going to net you in total about 5% more damage, and it's 10 seconds longer. And to rank these in order of fun, at number 7, we have the Smithscript Axe, which is really fun to use because we're going to be using Wild Strikes on it in Blood Affinity for some extra bleed damage. And of course, we're going to have that throwing ability where we can throw our axe and we can get some bleed build up from a distance too. So something to note about the throwing ability is even though it scales with an E, that's actually going to scale a little bit with intelligence on the throwing part, but I chose to just go for blood affinity and get the bleed build up from a distance because when you throw these, they just don't do a lot of damage. Even if you have higher stats in the other categories, the damage is still on the low side. So when you throw this, generally, the Draconic Tree Sentinel here actually has pretty decent resistances. His resistances against like bleed and status effects are pretty stout, much like the dragons in the game. But overall, between 3 and 6 throws for the most part is going to net you a bleed proc with these stats, which is still pretty impressive. Let's jump into equipment and stats. And we have the Blood Smithscript Axe, plus 25 preferably. We are using Wild Strikes, Dragon Communion Seal, of course. We have the White Mask and Rakshasa set on for some extra damage. We have the Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation. We have the Smithing Talisman, Axe Talisman. We have the Spike Crack Tier and Faith Tier as well. And now we're going to jump into stats for this one, which of course is going to be built around Strength and Arcane. So we have 40 Strength. If you two-hand, that's going to be 60. We have 45 Arcane, 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance. And for buffs, we're just going to be using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to buff up the throws and Wild Strikes. And the next one at number 6 we have is All Rot, and this is going to be built around Rotten Butterflies. I do get hit here, but they go through, and we end up getting a Rot proc pretty much immediately, which is very impressive. And then we're going to be using Romina's Purification, as well as her Pole Blade, of course, that's the Ash of War for it, to build up Rot as fast as we can. Now, this isn't going to be a playstyle for everyone. For me, this is fun to do every once in a while, but not really all the time, because the concept behind this build is simple. We're not using a high AR weapon or anything that's going to hit really hard, and we're using an incantation that's fairly light in terms of damage as well. However, they both build up Rot fast. Which means essentially what you're doing when you fight like this is you're going to be getting in hits occasionally, but you're waiting out the boss. You're having that Rot tick down their HP for massive amounts. We see 10,000 at this point, mostly through Rot, a couple hits in there. And that's the whole concept. You proc Rot, and then you kind of wait out the boss and you dodge. One thing to mention too is you can add in the Mushroom Crown for more damage if you want to. For me, it didn't make a huge difference though, because her weapon doesn't have an incredible amount of AR or physical damage upon hit. You're generally going to be building up rot and then waiting out the boss, as I mentioned previously. That's probably the best way to run this playstyle. And now you may be asking, well, Matt, why aren't you using it anyway, just for a little bit more damage? When it comes to the Mushroom Crown and White Mask now, I've been using mostly a lot of like full armor sets and different styles and stuff. They just don't really go with anything. So unless it makes a really substantial difference for me, I just kind of roll with whatever I feel like rolling with. And for this case, the Mushroom Crown just didn't add enough to it. Her weapon just really isn't that great as far as regular damage goes. The whole point and concept behind it is to build up rot. The Ash of War is built around that too. And Rotten Butterflies, though, that really is impressive in terms of how quickly you can build up rot. I was surprised that it only took one use to rot the Tree Sentinel here. And for equipment on this one, we're going to jump into equipment and stats. We have Pole Blade of the Bud, plus 10 preferably. We have the Dragon Communion Seal. We're really just using it for buffs and Rotten Butterflies, though. Rakshasa Set. We have Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, Shard of Alexander, Melisand's Prosthesis. We have Flock's Canvas Talisman. And then we have the Thorny Tier and Faith Tier as well. And now we're going to jump into stats, of course, for this build, if you want a Rot build, which is definitely fun to try this one out. We have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 26 Endurance. We have 35 Dexterity. We have 23 Faith. That's going to be 33 Faith with the Faith tier. We have 45 Arcane. And we're using Golden Vow, Hellish Shabiri, and Rotten Butterflies. Keep in mind, by the way, you could actually get both on the same playthrough. You just have to duplicate her Remembrance, and you could receive both of those. And at number 6, we have a Messmer Soldier's build, and this is going to be using Messmer Soldier's Axe, and of course, in the same way that they're using it. I put it on Quality Affinity, although it is kind of Quality Standard on the weapon to get a little bit extra damage, but overall, we'll be using War Cry, Guard Counters, and of course, the Shield too. And the whole concept here is going to be simple. You're going to block like crazy as much as you can. It's not going to be the best shield in the world, but it is the shield that they use. And then with the Messmer Soldier's Axe, you're going to have War Cry, which is going to alter your charge attacks and give you an attack damage boost. And then, of course, as far as the guard counters go, you're going to hear the sound on screen when it's like a perfect block, essentially, and then you can hit either right trigger or R2, and you're going to get those guard counters in, and you can see them. They can actually do pretty good amount of damage, and they also build up posture as well. So keep blocking, keep getting in guard counters, keep getting in light attacks, and then when you get the chance to use that altered R2, you want to use that as well, because that's going to be your big damage. That could hit, especially if you could switch to two-hand real fast. You can get between 3,000 and 5,000 damage with those. They hit really hard, especially with the Roar Medallion. I built this one around what I believe they would use, and the only thing I really didn't include was the snake coils or whatever they are, throwing them with a little bit of faith. You need high faith to get decent damage, and I was only getting probably about 1,200 damage for them, so they're not really worth farming for, but that is something you could add to the build as well, especially if you're at higher levels, and that would scale with faith. Another thing to note too is this bear specifically, several of them, I'm not sure if it's all of them, are going to use that attack that's on the red bear claws, which are really good, by the way. I did a build for them about a week ago. And as far as those attack goes, they're a little bit harder to block because sometimes they go right through their shield or they can guard break you easily. And yeah, this is definitely not the most overpowered one on the list. There's several on the list that are going to be easier to use, no question about it. But I was really curious what it would be like to be a Messmer soldier, so I decided to put this together. And it turns out it's pretty much okay. You've got a lot of versatility in your build, but it's not going to be a high damage build. It's going to be more of block, guard counters, and getting in charge hits. Probably should have added in the crossbow too. I think that would be a good addition to this build because that would fit the Messmer soldier as well, and that can give you a little bit of maybe I don't know, bleed build up or something. But you probably have to use regular bolts if you're going to go with the actual theme build though. By the way, if you're not subbed to my channel yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want some more awesome Elden Ring content. I'm still going to be covering Elden Ring's DLC. There's still a lot more that I want to do for it. I've been enjoying it a lot lately. Eventually, I'm going to be getting into New Game Plus 7 builds as well, although that's going to be taking a little bit more time than expected. And the reason for that is people are curious and they're wondering, well, why aren't you jumping back on the New Game Plus 7 builds? I am moving my character through Xbox as we speak, but the issue is the first time you go through DLC, it's easier no matter what. Even though I'm on Journey 39 on the character I'm using, I have to go through DLC once, the base game, and then back into DLC again. So even if you're on New Game Plus 7, your first run through DLC will not be true New Game Plus 7. Now for this build, we have Messmer's Soldier's Axe plus 25 preferably. We have Messmer's Soldier's Shield. We're using the Fire Knight seal. We of course have the Messmer Soldier's set on. We have the Axe Talisman Roar Medallion. Then we have the Great Shield Talisman. Sorry for the flicker there. I should have edited that out. We have the Curved Sword Talisman as well for the guard counters. Spike Crack tier. And we also have the Faith tier as well. And now we're going to jump into stats for this build, for the Messmer Soldier build. We have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 28 Endurance. We have 40 Strength and 40 Dexterity. We have 23 Faith. That's going to be 33 Faith with the Faith tier. I ran this in Quality Affinity. You would be better off just running it in Strength and probably getting an A, but I wanted to kind of have the Messmer Soldier theme, and since the standard on it is basically Quality, that's the way I went. We're using Golden Vow and Hellish Fury to buff this build. And at number 4, we have the Serpent Flail, which is an incredibly fun weapon, and the Ash of War that you're going to use for this, which essentially buffs the weapon and causes an explosion, is going to scale entirely with your Fate stat. So you have a couple of options after you use Flare O Serpent. So your first option is going to be charged attacks, and then you can do jump attacks, which is what you saw there, and they're both going to cause an explosion. Now there is one drawback with this, the fact that it's a flail. The charge attacks do take some time to use. And I would state, by the way, that pretty much the only drawback here is the fact that it's a flail. If this Ash of War was on the majority of other weapons in the game, it would be really good. The only thing I don't like about it is it has the flail moveset. It's stuck behind the flail moveset. With that said, though, it still does pretty good damage. Now, I want to mention that I think the Winged Serpent Helm is going to boost the damage on this Ash of War too. From my testing, it seems to. It boosts most of Messmer's Ashes of War, and I believe this counts as one. Now, if you want to get the most damage possible out of this flail weapon, you're going to pump up your Faith stat, which is going to give you a ton of fire damage and a lot of damage on the explosion. Now, there's one other way to build this. You could build it off a dexterity build and get more physical damage, but I don't really see the advantage there because for physical damage, there's so many better options than using flails, and then even using something like spinning weapon on a flail is going to be better than this. The best investment is in Faith and going for the fire damage. All around, I think it's really cool. I definitely think this one's worth picking up for sure, just to try to play around with and use for different bosses. Now, it's not going to be the most overpowered weapon in the game like a couple of these ones on here, but it is pretty good overall. The fire damage on it is solid, and the Ash of War scales really well with your Faith stat. Could end up being a really good side weapon if you're a Faith user, but you're going to have that 24 dexterity requirement. That is a little bit hefty in terms of how much dexterity you need. We're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this flail build. And for equipment, we have the Serpent Flail plus 10. We have the Erdtree seal. We have the Winged Serpent Helm to boost the damage on this Ash of War, and the Rakshasa set for some extra damage. We have Millicent's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Fire Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman. Then we have the Flame tier and Faith tier as well. And now we're going to jump into stats for this awesome flail build. We have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 25 Endurance. We have 24 Dexterity with Millicent's Prosthesis to get that minimum Dexterity requirement. And we have 80 Faith with the Faith tier. If you aren't using Millicent's Prosthesis, you're just going to need 24 Dexterity. It is a high requirement for Dexterity on the flail. The physical damage is going to scale with Dexterity, the fire damage with Faith. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And our next one up here on our incredibly fun list at number 3 is Seppuku Milady. I haven't done this yet with Seppuku, but yeah, this turned into an amazing build because I love the light great sword moveset, especially two-handed, and now that they buffed the charge attacks a little bit on these, it makes it even better. And in 1.13, that's exactly what they did. They took the charge attacks and they made them a little bit faster. If you saw there, we're able to get a little bit of posture damage on the hippo. Actually, a lot he ended up breaking. And each one does 2 hits, so you could benefit from the Axe Talisman as well as successive attack boost too. I think, honestly, if you're looking for a good amount of bleed buildup and you get a little bit bored with the jump attacks, use this moveset with Milady, use it with Seppuku, and you're going to love it. You could end up using the charge attacks for posture damage and then your regular light attacks to build up bleed really quickly. Yeah, the thing I love about that now is that they're slightly faster. They were buffed a little bit in 1.13 for the light greatsword moveset. It really does add to it, and you're going to benefit from hitting with successive hits as well as the Axe Talisman and Charge tier. We have the Blood Milady with Seppuku plus 25. We have any steel for buffs, Rakshas's armor set on, and the White Mask. We have Melissen's Prosthesis, we have the Axe Talisman, we have Lord of Blood's Exaltation, we have Wingsword Insignia or Rotten Wingsword Insignia if you have it. We have the Thorny tier and Faith tier for buffs. If you're at higher levels though, you're going to go with the Thorny tier and the Spike Crack tier. The Charge tier would be a great addition to this build. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 17 Mind, 28 Endurance, we have 15 Strength, we have 45 Dexterity, as well as 45 Arcane, we have 25 Faith with the Faith tier, and then for our buffs, we're going to be using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. By the way, if you're leveling past 150 on this one, I know Milady's pretty popular, especially in Blood, you're going to want to go for 80 Dexterity and 80 Arcane. And at number 2, we have probably the most broken spear in the game now. This thing is ridiculous, honestly, and that is going to be Messmer's Soldier Spear. We're going to talk about this one. This was commented on my channel. A lot of people requested me to make a build for this, and it is absurdly good. I wanted to add, by the way, that they were definitely right. Everybody that commented about this spear not making it in my top weapons list, it absolutely belonged in there. So the charged attack on this gives you 2 hits, a lot of posture damage, and if you combine it with bleed, in this case Seppuku, you get a ton of bleed buildup as well. Yeah, it's kind of just insane, honestly. Once I started to learn the moveset, and if you time it right, getting those 2 hits in gives you so much damage, thousands of damage, good bleed buildup. You can actually trigger successive attack talismans and boost as well. It's incredible. Yeah, I really like this spear. There's probably more I'm going to do with this spear in terms of building around it. I just enjoy Seppuku for right now because of the fact that we're using the charge attack anyway. You could use Royal Knight's Resolve, but specifically fighting Radahn here, having the extra action of using Royal Knight's Resolve, the windows aren't always there, so Seppuku seemed like a good option. Keep in mind if you're building around this, whether you use this build or you try something else, just to build around the charge attack. Aside from that, it's kind of just a regular, bigger spear, one of the great spears. But as far as the weapon itself, the charge attack is really where you're getting everything. So just build around that the best you can. You're going to get a ton of damage out of it, a ton of poise damage, and there's a lot you can do with it. By the way, you can actually dodge that attack to the left by rolling twice. It works quite well. As far as the grab, I always recommend rolling backwards. I do end up getting hit more times than I probably should have because I got a little bit greedy, but overall the windows do give you the opportunity to use the charge attacks on the spear against Consort Radahn. And of course, at the end here in a second, we're going to get his holiest attacks because just like Elden Beast, I feel like it's a little bit cheap at the end, but it does seem to be a common theme with some of these bosses. They just spam you at the last minute. Elden Beast is the same way. Radahn feels like he's the same way, but we're going to avoid these attacks and take him down anyway. By the way, at the end here, the best thing you can do as far as that attack goes is dodge once, delay, and then dodge back into him. That's how you avoid it. It is difficult to avoid, but if you delay just for like a second in the middle, you can dodge that attack most of the times he uses it. All right, in a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, and everything you need to know for this awesome spear build, this Messmer Soldier Spear build, which is one of the best weapons in the game, clearly. Incredible charge attacks. We have Messmer Soldier Spear in Blood with Seppuku on it. Any seal for buffs. We weren't using a lot of armor here. Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Axe Talisman, of course, Melissen's Prosthesis, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, and then you're going to want the Spike Crack tier for charge attack power, and Faith tier as well. Let's jump into stats. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 16 Mind. We don't need a lot of Mind for this build because we're just using Seppuku. We have 30 Endurance, 34 Strength. We have 25 Dexterity. It's kind of quality in Blood. We have 45 Arcane, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. And then we're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessing's Boon for some extra HP. It usually adds up to about 1 more blast per fight, and it actually stacks with pretty much everything, so I recommend having this one on you pretty frequently. Alright, enough talk about Messmer Soldier Spear. In a second here, we're going to go over the #1 most fun build and a weapon I love. So at number 1, we have the Sword of Night. I've been playing around with this weapon all week, and it's honestly amazing. It's not super overpowered in the sense that it's ridiculous in terms of damage, but the Ash of War has to be one of the most fun Ashes of War I've ever used in the game, and it does pretty good damage too. So the Ash of War Witching Hour Slash is actually chargeable. You could charge this. It is boosted by the Godfrey icon, and you'll have 2 different animations. If you don't charge it, you'll have a quick slash, which is good for quick bleed build-up and decent damage, but if you charge it, you'll have more damage, more bleed build-up, and a lot of successive hits. Basically a lot of firepower with a dex weapon. This is much like the Claws of Night, by the way. It only scales with dexterity, but you're going to have some magic damage as well as a good amount of physical damage. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this awesome Sword of Night build and a really cool weapon. Then we have the Sword of Night plus 10. We have any seal for buffs. We're using the Rakshasa armor set for some more damage here. We have Shard of Alexander, Millicent's Prosthesis, Wing Sword Insignia, or Rotten Wing Sword Insignia is better if you have it. Godfrey Icon because it is chargeable. Thorny Tear, Faith Tear, and we're using Market Shackle there. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 15 Strength. We have 80 Dexterity to get a lot of damage out of the weapon, and it's Ash of War, Witching Hour Slash. We have 25 Faith with the Faith Tier, so we can do the buffs that I like to use. And those are Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. If you haven't tried the Sword of Night yet, it's through a quest line, Ymir's quest line. Check this one out. It is absolutely awesome. Thanks for watching this one. I appreciate everybody for tuning in and watching my most fun builds in Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. Be sure to sub if you're not subbed yet and you want more awesome Elden Ring content. Next damage type I'll do is probably going to be Dexterity because I had a lot of people asking for Dexterity, and then I'll probably pull it after that and then continue to do different fun list build videos and powerful build videos and stuff like that. I can't wait for the next one, and I hope everybody has an amazing weekend.